In here. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar this afternoon on climate, health, and equity with NLC and City Health Dashboard. My name is Annie Osborne, and I am the Program Director of Strategic Partnerships for the National League of Cities. We are very excited to be partnering with City Health Dashboard on this event that comes as we close out NLC's Climate Sustainability and Resilience Month. City Health Dashboard is a valued partner of NLC, working with several of our teams and departments and many cities through NLC and through their own work. They provide critical data to cities about metrics that impact health holistically, such as education levels, health indicators, broadband access, credit insecurity, and now air pollution. During the webinar, we will hear about their new air pollution indicator and how cities can tap into that data to inform their health, climate resilience, and equity strategies. We will also hear from some colleagues from the Natural Resources Defense Council about some case studies in the work that they have been doing with cities through the climate challenge as well. And there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. This event is being recorded and the recording and slides will be shared afterwards. Please use the Zoom chat box to ask questions throughout, and we will get to those at the end. Please also keep yourself on mute while you're not speaking. So I will now introduce our speakers and then we'll get started. So first we have Abigail Mangar, who's a trained urban planner, environmental engineer, and policy analyst, passionate about planning that nurtures well-being, fosters healthy communities, and empowers marginalized voices in community development. She is the Health and Community Resilience Program Manager at the National League of Cities, where she delivers content on arts and culture-based community development, placemaking, equitably reimagining public spaces, resilient infrastructure development, and community empowerment. Becky Ofron leads engagement and partnerships for the City Health Dashboard, a program at NYU Grossman School of Medicine's Department of Population Health. She connects with partners and civic leaders to get data into the hands of those who can make a difference in urban health and equity, and is a doctoral student at Rutgers in leadership, practice, and research. Irene Nielsen works with mayors on passing and implementing ambitious climate policies in the American Cities Climate Challenge as a senior advocate at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Prior to NRDC, Irene worked at the US EPA, spanning 3 administrations with a focus on local sustainability, air quality, citizen science, and climate policy. And last but not least, Neela Ram is a climate advocate on the city strategy team at Natural Resources Defense Council. In her previous role with NRDC, she served as Atlanta's climate advisor. Her portfolio includes advising cities on sustainability and resilience strategies, building decarbonization, and cultivating and embedding equity in programs and policies. So I am now going to turn it over to my colleague Abigail to kick us off.
Thanks, Annie. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for the great introduction, Annie. I first want to start with just giving us a brief refresher on what we mean by air pollution. So air pollution, when we're talking about it, is the contamination of air from substances in the atmosphere that are harmful to human health and the environment. And common factors are often transportation emissions, ozone, particulate matter. We're aware of human-induced sources of what's causing these issues, such as vehicles, smoke, industrial emissions, and more. And not as commonly known or thought of when we think of air pollution is also indoor air pollution. So a couple of these, as well of radon, volatile organic compounds, are most common when we think of indoor pollution. So as we think about how climate change is causing increased frequency and severity of disaster events, such as wildfires and extreme heat, this is causing more harmful pollutants in the air, which in turn is increasing harm to humans. So when we're thinking about what exactly that harm to human health look like, it's a wide spectrum. So symptoms we often hear about are increased risk to respiratory infections, heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, these physical characteristics, but it's also just as impactful and harmful to our mental health and cognitive abilities. Of their links to depression and anxiety, harm to our central nervous system. Research also shows that air pollutants can alter our children's brain development and increase the risk of cognitive and emotional problems as they grow into adolescence. And when we think about health disparities of where you live, where we situate these harmful types of sources of where neighborhoods are near cars, what neighborhoods are closer to industrial plants, it tends to intersect with our neighborhoods that are majority Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as people of low socioeconomic status. So it's starting those harmful effects at birth and then throughout life if you're living in those neighborhoods. We're also thinking about the other, like these main factors of what's influencing air quality. Proximity of, like I mentioned, thinking about neighborhoods that are more exposed, time and season. So in extreme winter or extreme cold, rush hour times of day, our summers are seeing more hotter summers, our winters are seeing more colder winters. So in colder seasons, we're more indoors, more exposed to those indoor air pollutants. In summer, just as equally all the atmosphere outside of exposure. Demographics of who are most vulnerable to these air pollutants. We think about younger children as well as older adults and our people who are already having cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. So in setting the tone, there are many other factors that are influencing our air pollutants, but this is a quick overview to set a foundation of what we're talking about when we think of exposure and health impacts to air pollution. So I'll pass it over to Becky, who will give a little bit more context of what we mean.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Abigail. I'm Becky Ofran. I'm from the City Health Dashboard, and I'm excited to continue this discussion with this great panel today. We're going to be sharing a lot of information that cities can put to use. And to kick that off, the dashboard is excited about some new recent data updates. But first, what is the City Health Dashboard? So the City Health Dashboard is housed at NYU School of Medicine. It is a free online data resource for cities featuring city and census tract level data for health and the social and environmental drivers of health. We have about 40 measures for over 750 cities across the US, and we're always working to add smaller cities and other geographies and features. So if you don't find your city on the City Health Dashboard today, do stay tuned over time. And since launching in 2018, the dashboard has been used by mayors, city managers, health department leaders and staff, just as much as community advocacy organizations, researchers, high school students, and more. And our measures span 5 domains, from health outcomes to social factors to the physical environment, really to portray the full picture of health in a community. We are always researching new measures. We know that just this set of 40 is not the complete picture of health, but we're really trying to show that breadth of data that can help city leaders in making decisions. So our current list of measures is shown here for you to scan through, and the ones listed in gold are available at the city and census tract or neighborhood level, and the ones in blue are currently only available at the city level. And we're always working to improve the granularity of our data too. So both geographically, like at smaller just geographic units of neighborhoods, and demographically, providing more racial ethnic breakdowns, for example. And while there are lots of useful ways to interact with the data, today I want to just focus on a few of kind of special interest to those working at the intersection of climate, health, and equity in cities. So first, just last month, we launched a new measure of ozone pollution. This is monthly data available every month from January 2018 to December 2020. It's available at the census tract level. And we're kind of disseminating this new data of ground level ozone through our partners at George Mason University. And they are partners through NASA's Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences team. And it's an average daily maximum 8-hour concentration of ozone in parts per billion over the course of a month. And then another air pollution measure that we have is particulate matter. This is annual data that we have from years 2013 through 2018, also available at the census tract data. And this is the average daily concentration of PM 2.5. And then I wanted to just highlight one of our social and economic measures, income inequality. This is annual data available for years 2013 through 2019, also at the census tract level. And this one's a little complicated, so I just wanted to introduce it today, but I encourage you to explore the site, the other social and economic factors, and we actually have a great blog on the site that dives deep into this income inequality measure. But just to introduce it to you, we use a measure called ICE, the Index of Concentration at the Extremes. And for any given city or census tract, it compares the number of households in the bottom 20% of the national household income range to the number of households that fall in the top 20%. And this number then describes the mix of household incomes in that neighborhood or city that you're looking at, ranging from -100, which means that all of the households are in the lower income or deprived category, to +100, where all of the households are in like the higher income or privileged category. With 0, kind of the middle of the range here, meaning two things, that it could be both incomes are present in equal numbers, or that none of the households in that neighborhood fall somewhere in the middle. They're all either privileged or deprived categories. So I know that's a lot and that's complex, but I just wanted to introduce it to you and let you know that it's on the site, and it's an interesting way to look at inequality in a city. And along with other measures like children in poverty and educational attainment, we have a high school completion measure to just kind of describe and show the ways that inequality shows up in a city. And then just to point out also that an important feature of the ozone data is that it is monthly, and there can be extreme seasonal variation in ozone, with much higher levels in the warmer months and lower and more variable levels in cooler months. So I pulled up the map from the site here for just showing July, July 2020 ozone in Washington, DC compared to December 2020. And I know that was also during COVID, and there might be other things going on there, but just to really show those differences between summer and winter in an eastern city. So looking at the different months is really critical with ozone. And, ground level ozone is created in warmer conditions with combustion products. And we'll hear from Irene and Neela soon about how cities can take action to reduce these pollutants that impact health in warmer temperatures, which are expected to increase with climate change. So as you all know, it's really all connected. So while I would love to spend some more time exploring the City Health Dashboard data with you, I want us to have plenty of time to hear from Irene and Neela and get to discussion and questions. So I'll close with just letting you know that all dashboard data is easily accessible by download or through our API straight from the site. And if you do need help with anything, please feel free to reach out. And I'll make sure my email is in the chat at some point. So I will now pass it over to Irene.
Hi, I'm very glad to be here today, and thank you, Becky, for the City Health Dashboard share. Super critical tool. My background is in urban planning, and my early career work was local government. So over the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of working alongside cities with ambitious climate goals. And I want to say that it has not been an easy time, and I really appreciate each of you for the service that you provide every day in your cities. My goal is going to be to cover a lot, but to give you kind of a broad overview of the American Cities Climate Challenge project, with the hopes that some of these strategies will pique your interest and be a match for your community. So I think the first thing that Abigail and Becky have said, but I want to put a fine point on it, is just for us to make the connection that climate change is a health equity issue. And And then NLC just released a report about city climate migration in US cities with a great map that shows what to call climate change where you live, and it names the main impacts in different parts of the country. Very huge variations from heat to rainfall to wildfires. And we know that these impacts are disproportionately faced by poor communities and Black and brown communities, and that's due to historic drivers of racism and inequality and disinvestment in housing policy, among other drivers. So what can cities do to address climate change? I'm going to dive into talking about the American Cities Climate Challenge, and hopefully I can move the slides forward. It's not working for me yet. Oh, I jumped to. Here we go. So what is the American Cities Climate Challenge? It is a direct rebuttal to the Trump administration's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. And it was an assertion that cities can meet the Paris Climate Agreement goals based on their unique authorities, roles, and capacities without federal leadership. So that was, several years ago, but here we are in 2022 with some results to talk about. So which cities were part of this? On the next slide, you'll see a map, someone can help me direct here, of 25 cities, here we go, nationally that applied with ambitious climate policy goals and were selected for the challenge. These are large cities, and I'm conscious that many size cities are on this call today. I believe a lot of these solutions are shareable and scalable. So I'll be talking about that at a high level. On the next slide, just want to give you a glimpse of the main buckets of which this work was in. So buildings and transportation, broadly speaking, on the building side, this includes making buildings more energy efficient, increasing renewable energy as a source, and electrifying buildings. And on the transportation side, really reducing the amount that people need to drive by giving them more options and incentives, and electrifying the actual vehicular travel that is in place. All of this would help us reach our Paris Climate Agreement goals. So to give you a little bit more of a taste, each of the cities had their own portfolio of actions in these three categories of foundational, ambitious, and moonshot. And so for buildings, on the foundational side, a good subset of these are municipal strategies. So energy efficiency in municipal buildings, supplying and procuring renewable energy for municipal buildings, putting EV charging in municipal lots, city code enforcement policies to make sure energy efficiency was actually being enforced through the code, as well as some virtuous competitions of getting the community buildings to increase their energy efficiency, and developing workforce development for the green jobs pipeline around energy efficiency. This is all foundational work. On the ambitious category, financing programs like Property Assessed Clean Energy or PACE were part of the strategies, creating new policies to require benchmarking, auditing, and retro commissioning for buildings that reach a certain square footage threshold to achieve energy efficiency standards, or even passing building performance standards for existing buildings. In EV and solar readiness policies, or essentially putting wires under parking lots or wiring them to the roofs, even if the solar or charging infrastructure aren't planned with the current capital investment, making sure that added additional cost down the road doesn't impede the progress when those technologies are desired. And frankly, the cost savings is enormous for this kind of no regret strategy. In the moonshot category, decarbonization or removing fossil fuel combustion from within buildings or as a source of energy for buildings was strategies through both code and through pilot projects. So I know that's a lot, but I just wanted to give you a taste of the potential options for buildings and energy. On transportation, and you can look through this, the foundational strategies included making public transit a better experience, making sure certain priority networks for walking and biking were in place, education and incentives for electric vehicles, scooter share, bike share, commuter incentives, and electrifying city fleets and buses. The ambitious work included getting creative with some behavior change programs for low carbon mobility, fully implementing community-wide bike and pedestrian networks, really reckoning with the price of parking and right-sizing that to change incentives around driving, putting in new low emission zones to address air quality, and expanding frequency of transit networks. And on the moonshot side, you've got strategies that are around market transformation for community scale transition to EVs, and fully eliminating parking minimums as a requirement, building housing near transit, and making EV charging infrastructure ubiquitous in cities. I'm going to just kind of jump ahead and say the results are in, and in these 25 cities, they were successfully able to meet and exceed the Paris Climate Agreement goals. And so this happened through improving quality of life, air quality, and new job training, and passing and implementing a bunch of policies, what we call locked in emissions reductions, because these are works underway through the projected emissions targets of 2025 and 2030. So, like I said, this is through transforming streets, walking and biking, accelerating electrification, winning funding for mobility, and putting equity at the center of these policies. And I want to talk a little bit more about that before I close. Transportation, we talked about these same strategies, looking at the code, building electrification, existing building efficiency, and renewable energy procurement. So it's not just important what we did, but also how we did it. And so in the midst of the pandemic and the racial reckoning, we redefined what means to be high impact in this work. And so not just looking at greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but centering historically underserved voices, Black and Brown voices, and doing this intentionally throughout the full cycle of policy design, development, implementation, and with an eye toward creating a long-term policy and designed for prosperity that's durable. And so I just want to end by saying, how we did it. These are the elements of the equitable work that we put into practice, co-creating and using tools like the City Health Dashboard to inform where inequities were the highest. This ICE index is very interesting, Becky. Thinking about data-informed decision-making, building local partner coalitions, identifying the economic recovery benefits and how they could be tracked to communities of color, thinking about bridge building across city departments, housing, et cetera, for the enhancing the equity results within the energy and climate traditional tracks within city government portfolios, and using the data and the metrics to guide and track the outcomes of the work. I'm just going to end and pass it over to Neela with a reference to this playbook, which includes a succinct page for each of the strategies I mentioned in case you want to read about them in more than a very, very quick, rapid succession. This is a good resource for you to find, and I can drop that link in the chat. So I'll pass it over to Neela, who will help us to focus in on the Atlanta heat health story. And thanks for the time, guys.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, everyone. Neela Ram, former climate advisor for the City of Atlanta and currently rounding out the city strategy team for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Sorry, I'm trying to advance slides. So I know we've heard about data availability and tools needed to inform policy, as well as the national landscape on climate action. And I'd like to drill down on how data and partnerships, as well as this national landscape, have helped inform policy action in Atlanta. And I'll go into some detail about how the city is leveraging these two things to operationalize policies that have an impact on climate and health. So Atlanta's Office of Resilience sits in the Mayor's Office for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And the office works on cross-cutting issues from improving waste diversion strategies to prioritizing energy efficiency across municipal operations, to reducing barriers to food access and improving food security. The team within the Office of Resilience relies on data, strategy, planning, engagement and engagement and outreach to maximize impact and delivery of services for all Atlantans. The city recently elected a new mayor, and this office is working with the new administration on how to embed resilience and sustainability across City Hall, and prioritizing the development of deep internal and external partnerships to build on the previous successes and meet the current needs of its residences. Oh, sorry, went too far. Oh, I must have skipped a slide. So Atlanta, like most cities, experienced heat waves and the resultant heat island effect more heavily in June through August, and the city ranks among the most vulnerable cities in the country. The negative effects of these heat surges heavily impact a community's well-being, from increased air pollution levels to a rise in heat-related illnesses or mortality, to increased energy usage through air conditioning to combat rising temperatures. While not unique to Atlanta, planning efforts in the city have largely been focused on protecting social and economic aspects of the community, which has a limiting impact on how the environment is perceived, especially in areas that haven't been prioritized for social or economic protection. In other words, the negative impact of this avoidance is especially apparent in under-resourced areas. Environmental degradation, and in this case, urban heat island effect, has gone hand in hand with underinvestments in community building. Initial analysis reveals that predominantly Black neighborhoods in Atlanta are more highly exposed to heat and other stressors due to this lack of investment. Urban heat, moving on to urban heat ATL. So urban heat ATL is one such project that seeks to understand the impacts of heat at a granular level. What does this mean for vulnerable community members? How can we characterize urban heat island and climate change effects in these geographies? And what does redlining, underinvestments and avoidance and other discriminatory practices, how do they contribute to these negative effects? So in the summer of 2021, a team set out to conduct a mapping campaign called Atlanta Heat Watch to map the spatial pattern of heat. The team set out to understand how heat risk aligns with other important dimensions of vulnerability to climate change, including race and ethnicity, income, public investments as it really relates to climate adaptation. Campaign organizers sought volunteers to use digital sensors to collect temperature readings along routes that that partners identified. Sorry, it's taken me a minute to advance slides. Okay, so the partnership, sorry. So the partnership for this campaign is one of the hallmarks of success in moving forward in Atlanta, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about this collaboration. So the Atlanta Heat Watch campaign consisted of academic and community partners, including Spelman College, Georgia Tech, Emory University, the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, Harambe House, Partnership for Southern Equity, City of Atlanta, the National Weather Service, and the joint City County Emergency Management Agency, which is City of Atlanta and Fulton County. The partners served as experts in connecting the community to climate concerns. Within this team, it's a cross-cutting team of nonprofits, universities, government institutions, and community partners, which was able to enhance the public understanding of the project. The partners worked together to produce a variety of ideas for increased engagement within the project and the Atlanta community, as well as promote awareness about urban heat island effect and climate change. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So if you look at this map, each point has been normalized to the recorded temperature at the airport, and different colors represent various degree differences visualized when comparing the data from the airport. So red being more than 9 degrees Fahrenheit and blue being less than 9 degrees Fahrenheit. So for this project, the aim was to map the hottest parts of the city to determine the relationship between temperature stresses and underinvested neighborhoods. And then the idea was that this data would then be used as a launching point to advocate for adaptation strategies to protect these communities in a rapidly warming climate. If we take a closer look at the map, you'll see that the northern part of the city is bluer, and areas in the southern part of the city are darker and redder. So this is the project growth over time. And this is with a focus on the southern parts of the city, and we see that a large concentration of the orange to red dots are in the southern part of the city. And the time frame for this was May through June of last year, or March through June of last year, sorry. So in addition to urban heat island effect, a parallel track that the city was developing was looking at energy burden. And the big question is, how do we translate data into policy development? So an independent initiative led by GreenLink Analytics in partnership with the city of Atlanta took a deep dive into energy burden. So what percentage of income a household spends on utility bills? Analysis revealed that the highest burden zip codes are predominantly in the central southern parts of the city, which has correlation to the redder and hotter dots from the Urban Heat Island Mapping Project. While the Heat Island Mapping Project didn't inform, what the city would do for alleviating energy burden, we were able to leverage that project to underscore the importance of improving energy efficiency in high burdened households. Housing affordability, climate change adaptation, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, and improving vegetation and tree canopy are all related, especially when talking about into underinvested communities. The city and its partners now discuss co-benefits and not just focus on a singular aspect of any issue. Investing in a community doesn't mean just planting more trees or retrofitting houses for the sake of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The city has really stressed the importance of talking about these initiatives in the context of driving investments to these communities and improving the affordability for current residents, which will then lead to improved outcomes like limiting urban heat island effect, reducing GHG emissions, and improving and protecting the city's tree canopy. Sorry, I'll talk about where the city currently is and where it's planning on going. So the city has showed a continued commitment to addressing climate change and extreme heat the impacts of extreme heat across the city. Currently, the plan focuses on reducing reliance on fossil fuels, improving efficiencies in energy consumption and water usage, expanding green infrastructure for carbon sequestration. And so when the city updates its plans next, it hopes to leverage the data collected through the Urban Heat Island project to align them with the energy burden work so that the city can drive investments to these historically marginalized communities. So looking ahead at next steps. So the city needs to update the climate action plan. The last time it was updated was in 2015. So this is a critical next step. So in partnership with various technical and community partners, they're working on a suite of actionable recommendations and, with the support of the American Cities Climate Challenge, that the city can carry forward as the city transitions to clean energy by 2035. And so while all these data projects have some overlap, the hope is that we can use it to bolster the conversation with various audiences, both internally and externally. Atlantans are invested in the conversation and outcome. And we see this demonstrated through their participation in these mapping projects, as well as policy roundtables that are conducted through our advisory boards. I know we have to get to the panel discussion, so I want to just leave it there and talk about how I wanted to just emphasize how Atlanta really has tried to marry technical components, policy development, and co-creating with the community to drive impact and action.
Amazing. Thank you, Neela and Irene and Abigail. I have some questions to kind of kick off just some discussion, and I know there's questions in the chat. So feel free to be putting questions in the chat and I'll try and incorporate them just for our other attendees to know. So the American Cities Climate Challenge, it looks like some really exciting results, and just being able to see what Atlanta has done is really inspiring, I think, for cities. In terms of kind of thinking about clean energy and some of these other kind of big policies and strategies that are often thought of as like state level policies, can you talk a little bit more about what cities can do on some of those issues that have traditionally been thought of as really state or regional level?
Sure, I can jump in there. And I saw that Samantha asked in the chat for a more detailed kind of case study. So maybe it would be helpful to answer the question with respect to St. Paul, Minnesota, one of the smallest cities in the challenge. And, there are some things that are state authority, so that is legitimate, but there's so much that cities have authority and policy making responsibility over. So in St. Paul, just to think across all the actions that they've done, they passed a benchmarking law for the city prior to starting the challenge. During the challenge, they advanced a deep municipal retrofit of their libraries. They were able to generate a partnership program with the county government for workforce training around building efficiency investments. They were also working alongside partners in Minneapolis to advance the state commercial building code, because in Minnesota, the building code is set by the state. But we're able to assert the role of the two biggest cities in the state in understanding the impact of that code making policy process. And I should say that's both the advocacy and also the administrative process of writing the code itself. In St. Paul, they built 26 miles of bike lanes and 2 miles of new sidewalks. They actually removed parking minimum requirements, which is really exciting, and really helps revitalize some of the historic districts of St. Paul, where older buildings that had commercial potential were sort of overlooked because they didn't have the kind of parking that big box developments do. And so they were able to really remove that kind of old requirement around parking that was hanging around the neck of some of their the revitalization of the city. One of the most exciting things that St. Paul is undertaking that I would love to mention is that they are generating a EV car share program. And they're doing this in a way that centers equity, because they're putting more than half of the charging hubs in low income communities. They are partnering also with Minneapolis in this, and creating EV charging infrastructure in underserved neighborhoods alongside an option from car ownership, which is the car share program itself, and piloting this as an equitable strategy. So Mayor Carter has been a real leader in the climate challenge and a great example of what cities can do, just to mention some of those exciting actions.
Great, and it sounds like those are strategies that cities of all sizes can implement too. I saw some comment in the chat about, it's easier for large cities to kind of receive a lot of the focus and ability to take some of these actions, but some of these sound like things that small cities can be doing also. Great, and then just thinking about the kind of federal infrastructure funding that is starting to flow to cities. Are any of these strategies able to be kind of completed with any of that ARPA funding? And this is kind of for any of you to answer, just how federal funding affects the ability to implement some of these climate and health strategies.
I can take that one. Atlanta is currently exploring how to use ARPA funding for these weatherization programs as it relates to improving energy efficiency and the health and safety of existing single family homes in these identified neighborhoods, through the Urban Heat Island Mapping Project and through the Energy Burden Map. So currently looking at how can we scale up a program, starting off with a pilot, seeing if there's a suite of recommendations that can be scaled up, not only in these in this smaller geography within the city, but how to have a citywide approach to weatherization. And it's currently exploring how to use ARPA funds to accelerate that process. And it's built, and I will say this is a culmination of many years of working with these neighborhoods, identifying, how to roll out the program, how to be effective at intake and outreach, and making sure that households and eligible residents understand what this program entails, is there any responsibility on their behalf, exploring that. So this really is the culmination. ARPA has provided that culmination of many years long effort.
Great, and Abigail, I see the link that you put in the chat. Do you want to share anything about NLC's resources on ARPA?
Yeah, so NLC, we made a few fact sheets. The first one I put in the chat is about health equity, and it basically summarized here's what you can do in regard to the health equity realm with ARPA dollars. I think the first step is just figuring out what's possible of what you can do, because I'm sure it's a lot of stuff is coming out right now, and it provides some case studies, it highlights some resources, it also highlights City Health Dashboard in it as well. And then gives a few case studies. And then the second one I put in there was another kind of encompassing one, the ARPA sustainability fact sheet, of thinking more in the traditional climate lens of what ARPA says you can do, and where funds can go, and similarly highlighting some case studies and tools, as well as relationships with partners we have. So if there are questions of wanting to learn more about something that's in either of those fact sheets or resources that are highlighted in it, folks can reach out to me.
Great. And I want to go back to now just kind of the question of how cities can deal with all of this work amidst COVID and kind of what's been going on the past 2 years. You know, early in the pandemic, we heard the phrase kind of the earth is healing. I live in a very urban area and in Jersey City, and I remember just being shocked at how quiet the world around me was, and you could hear birds and things like that. And we really noticed the difference in air quality with people shifting more indoors, less travel. And this also points to the comment in the chat about noise. And so I'm just curious on kind of the expert thoughts on, was this temporary? Is there a way to kind of, you know, return to some of that reduction in air pollution and noise pollution as the world has returned to air travel and things like that? And as a side note, also, what does that shift mean for when we're indoors much more, either, you know, quarantining or just out and about less?
I think we're still at this interesting, like, we're right on the lines of where do we go, of how much do we go back to what was before, and how much do we adapt and realize what's working with how we changed. And so given that a lot of organizations are kind of on that middle ground, I think it's hard to tell of what it means, of what the impacts will be towards air pollution, and the idea of, are we going to get back to that quiet? I want to stress, though, that being indoors, and it's seeming like the air quality, and it was getting better outdoors, it doesn't mean that we've solved, like, all our health is better. There are still a lot of pollutions associated with being indoors, and we spend about 90% of our time indoors. So it's really putting some more awareness of how actually we don't talk as often about indoor air quality, and we have to be thinking of, like, how are we adjusting how we build homes, what materials we're using, how often we're doing maintenance on our buildings to ensure that we have good quality air indoors. NLC recently partnered with the International Well Building Institute, who have created multiple standards similar to LEED, to look at health in terms of how do we promote indoor air quality to mitigate air pollution, and think about our ventilation systems and humidity and toxic materials. So on another lens, I'm happy to talk to folks about that as well if they'd like to learn more about indoor air quality.
Great, thank you, Abigail. And then just, I'll wrap up kind of my questions for the discussion here. So if folks do have other questions, this is a good time to start putting them into the chat. But Irene and Neela, you both kind of talked about the importance of community engagement in the process, you know, especially in implementing these strategies in an equitable way. Can you talk a little bit more about how that process might look in terms of using data and turning it into policy? And Neela, I think you said, like, that's the big question. How do we move from data to policy? And in doing that in a way that really engages the community is a question that we hear a lot from cities. And I'd like to hear your thoughts more on that.
Yeah, I can start by taking that. Within the climate challenge, we leaned on and cherished a measure of equity called energy burden, which Neela talked about, and it's the ratio of money spent on utilities to as a ratio of income. Um, in looking at energy burden, in attempting to take a bite out of the energy burden inequities that we were able to map at the census tract level for cities, um, we did follow in different ways in different cities an ideal process that started with really looking at the data. And I think defining the problem and problem definition and data informed engagement at the very kind of earliest stage with community is such a critical trust building um, position to start in, which is to say, like, let's look at the facts around what's happening here in our community and understand who's being most impacted, where this is happening, and really try to talk about that problem definition as the starting point to then lead into, okay, so then what are the points of intervention? What is the policy or program design to address this particular strategy? And one of the benefits of this is that it can really make stakeholders and community members such important voices of support for some of the work that we try to do in the city government, where communities really own the story around how they can benefit, or how they've been impacted, and what's required in order to address that. So I think that energy burden use is one example. It really does bear out in different ways. And so I'm curious, and I'm sure the folks on this call have different stories and examples to share with us. And, I think that what we did also explore the importance of thinking about community partners as partners and as assets that have information. The term community consultant was even used to really kind of elevate with high regard the engagement that community members provide in their free time, often volunteer, to inform the work. And thinking about how that differs from professionals who are paid to help cities advance their work. And so I think that, that partnership and that elevated support and engagement are all critical factors for making sure that the process itself leads toward an equitable design and outcome throughout, the whole process.
I don't have too much more to add to what Irene said, but I did want to talk about, through the American Cities Climate Challenge and the work with the city of Atlanta, the Department of Planning and the Department of Transportation, they have a robust partnership and engagement shop, but it's very specific to transportation, and it's very specific to planning, and it's very specific to watershed. The Office of Resilience was able to plus up those efforts because it's such a cross-cutting entity within City Hall, and be more nimble with the data that was emerging, with the help of American Cities Climate Challenge, and with the support that they offered in deepening these external partnerships to really inform policy, that we were given a wider berth to really explore what that means. Being able to be flexible and nimble as we look at the data that's constantly changing. Some data doesn't change, but a lot of it does. And being able to respond to it in real time, and then use the internal partnerships with planning, with transportation, with watershed, to figure out what that means in terms of implementation. So I don't know if that is all helpful, but I think that cities are well equipped to respond to the moment with what they have.
Just kind of as a follow-up to that, which is really helpful to hear how that's worked out. I'm curious, both in the challenge, but how you would recommend for cities not in the challenge. Is it best for cities to tackle these strategies one at a time, or really as a suite of strategies, like through a citywide climate action plan or something like that? Thinking about it both from kind of the small and big city perspective.
I can respond to that. I think in Atlanta, we have, sorry, I can't figure out how to turn off my notifications. We have, we find that we're more effective when we find alignment across multiple strategies, that it's hard to do things in silos and it's hard to do things, in a enclosed box. Something, just for project management, you kind of have to do that, but just having the ability and the awareness to know where there's alignment, where there's overlap, where we can combine conversations as needed, I think is a really important skill to have as you're thinking through climate action, because everything really is related. Sorry, my notifications are out of control.
I would second that. And again, I think the folks on this call have some great insight on that one too. But just in thinking about things like, we may be trying to advance renewable energy and focused on sort of state policy or utility restrictions, but the community is thinking about like how much it costs, their energy bills, and whether or not they are able or allowed to put solar on their roof, which in the long term could actually lower their energy and be a source of wealth creation that is stable and 20 years locked in. So these are very different ways of thinking about the topic. And so in my experience with community engagement, it's so important to essentially have a longer term engagement strategy, often around a climate action plan that encompasses the full suite of quality of life issues. And then the actual sort of project strategies and tactics are addressing those goals. And so the community doesn't think, the same way that we have to do the work. And that translation is part of the role and part of the challenge of moving it forward.
That's really helpful. I want to just point to a question in the chat about indoor air. I know we touched on it a little bit. Samantha asked, how can cities use their levers? I never know if it's levers or levers of change to promote better indoor air quality on a larger scale, as opposed to building by building. And then Councilwoman Schneider had actually responded about the using HEPA filters, and it looks like she's in an area with fires. Improving the filtration in public buildings, especially ones that are community gathering spots. And that seems like a great indoor air solution. I just wanted to see if anybody else had other solutions for thinking broadly about indoor air improvements.
I love that comment in the chat. And I think about this from different sides. Also, as a parent of children, I think about the strategies that have been put in place in schools, the sheer attention and education that our kids now have about air quality and the fact that germs can spread in the air. My children are relatively young. I think that sort of awareness is something that will stick with them for their life. I also think about the inequity of indoor air quality discrepancies, particularly in homes that have deferred maintenance, do have standing indoor air quality problems. And often, these are the same homes that will get deferred for energy efficiency upgrade investments because of those health and safety violations that impede those investments. I think it's sort of a sign of hope that there is a dimension to the IJA Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that includes addressing some of this health and safety violation barriers from being a block to participating in the weatherization program. These are the kinds of system-wide barriers that we really need to see put in place so that we're not sort of continuing to invest in the more privileged homes and overlook because of pre-existing conditions some of the most needed indoor air quality benefits. I think another thing worth mentioning is the role that decarbonization strategies play in improving indoor air quality. And there's been some good research of late around the impact of gas stoves on asthma. And so I think just for us to think about any kind of building code strategies or city policies that move toward decarbonizing buildings, we have the potential to improve indoor air quality and really realize health outcomes and benefits through those strategies. And that has been a driver for the communities that have adopted these policies. For example, San Jose, California, really that work was led by mothers with children with asthma.
Great, thank you. And I was just going back to Councilwoman Schneider's early comment about whether the air pollution, the ozone indicator included air pollution from airports, jet engines, helicopters, et cetera. I'm just going to copy into the chat. So the ozone data were created by merging ground level ozone observations from EPA, EPA's air quality system network with computer modeling predictions from NOAA done by our research partners at George Mason. So I'm just kind of copying that information since it's kind of detailed into the chat. That is on the one pager that I also shared the link to earlier. If you want more specifics on kind of where that data is coming from and how it's calculated, you can be sure to find it there as well. Okay, I'm just going through here to see what else we might want to touch on. I see more indoor air suggestions being shared there as well, which is great. Lots of great stuff, resources being shared in the chat. So make sure you do open those up and copy those links. And any other questions as we get ready to wrap up here? Give it one more minute. Yeah, I hear you on the missing data in really specific areas. It's, you know, it's an issue that everyone is certainly dealing with. And, you know, while City Health Dashboard tries to address some of that at the local level, we know that there's a lot missing out there. Well, I have learned a lot on this panel with folks that know a lot about these issues and are really implementing some of these solutions on the ground. I just want to, again, thank all the attendees for joining. We know that it's a lot to give up an hour of your time. So thank you for being here. Irene and Neela, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise. Thank you, Abigail, Annie, and the whole NLC team. We really appreciate partnering with you to make sure that cities are getting what they need. I think slides will be available. I'm sure our contact information will be available. So if anything, please follow up with us and we're happy to continue the conversation. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Have a good afternoon.